what were the moments that stuck out to you? What were the key takeaways? And you were talking about some of them, the emotion and how maybe that's not going to really have the weight that we think it might.
The first week of the trial was very, very emotional. I mean, the first two testimonies, I literally, when they played the video, I mean, I had a knot in my throat from bawling. Just it was just so sad. And then as I observed the defense attorney sort of kind of the way that he was guiding the testimony and the questions that he was asking, it became eminently clear to me that that painful emotion that I was experiencing was emotion. It's morally incorrect, but legally, that's a different question. So it caused me to look at the testimonies with a different eye to really basically try to pick or piece apart the defense to see if they actually have any valid points. And sadly, I don't see, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't see, even with the efforts that the defense attorney made to kind of diminish the moral characterizations that were being made, I think, I still don't think it doesn't look like a good case for the defense to me.
Anyone else want to chime in on that question before I move on to the next question?
I think for me, what struck me was the fact that looking at the climate of this country right now, and then looking at the climate of the trial. You know, one of the things that was interesting is that it's probably the first time in history, as in my life, that I can remember seeing so many police officers testifying against another officer. And testifying to the right and the wrong, and going back to what Ivette was on, not getting caught up in the emotion, but just testifying to the right and the wrong of a procedure that an individual was using. You haven't seen that, and that's coming from, from the 60s to now, to where individuals are standing up, against what they feel was an injustice, because usually individuals, especially in the police force, would actually have a fear of going against another officer because of retaliation, and we would see that. Now we're seeing that. I think individuals, the climate on one end that is perpetuating the racism and the disunity, on another end now is fostering, the consciousness that individuals are saying, we can't keep doing this the same way. We have to change, and if we don't stand up, then we're supporting this other mindset. And I think this is one thing that's what's on trial here, not just the officer, the very fiber of America and the consciousness and the challenging individuals coming out their comfort zone. I think this trial is greater than what, I think individuals have even focused in on.
Representative, I wanted to talk about something you mentioned. You heard the officers talking about their training, not only the training they've experienced, the policies that they've written. You've heard testimony about the actual training that former Officer Chauvin actually went through. You have talked in the past, you don't like to use the word training, but what does this tell you about any changes that may be necessary in Iowa's law enforcement agencies when it comes to educating officers and preparing them for very difficult situations that they may find themselves in?
Well, I think that, again, what has happened with, George Floyd, God bless his soul, that incident has now sparked, a mindset that needs to be changed. even in us dealing with the conditioning that officers are. That's why I don't like to say training, because we are conditioned, So now we have to deal with unconditioning. We have to change that conditioning. That's where we're at now. And I think we're seeing that, I think we're seeing that with, individuals, even police officers. I know we did a conditioning, seminar here with several law enforcement, and even they were reaching out for something different. They wanted something different. They didn't want the same old, to where at the end, everybody's singing Kumbaya, kissing each other on the cheek, and, and going back to the same business. They wanted to be challenged with not even knowing they wanted to be challenged, and they accepted that. So training, as it has to change from that term. You train individuals to act a certain way. We have to be able to condition individuals to get away from the traditional conditioning, that police officers have been taught these number of decades.
Reverend Johnson, go ahead.
I was just going to tell you, watching this trial feels like I took my snail for a walk and left my feet at home. It's like we watching a trial to prove if a man murdered somebody that we watched on video murder him.
And is that a bizarre sort of thing to watch? Is it hard to watch that? How do you make sense of that?
To me, and I love what Miss Yvette said about, looking at it from a legal perspective, because for me, sometimes it's hard to do that in the midst of this. And I get everybody have the right to due process, and everybody have the right for a fair and an equal trial. But what I also understand is that if I murder somebody on video, they're gonna put that in pretrial, and I'm going to jail. And honestly, that's what it is. That there is no long drawn out 2-4 week trial for them to prove if I did it. If I'm on video, if they got Ray on video hitting his wife, he's going to jail. If they got a KO on video kicking his dog, he's going to jail. If they got Keisha on video hitting her child, she's going to jail. To me, the problem is that we're sitting here battling semantics and talking about semantics when the truth of the matter is he murdered him. He needs to go to jail. And if another police officer do the exact same thing, they should face the exact same consequence. This man should be proof to all of us that Black lives really do matter. We've seen too many of them get away with this. And now here we are talking about the trial of somebody who can get away with it again after we done watched it on video for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
So 9 minutes and 29 seconds, actually.
So again, I say, I took my snail for a walk and left my feet at home.
One of the things, just to horsey back on Reverend Johnson's comment, when the defense attorney gave his opening statements, he compellingly told the juror that the evidence in this case is beyond 9 minutes and 29 seconds. He said that he's going to present evidence beyond that 9 minutes and 29 seconds that will, in his opinion, tell a more clear view of what happened. So when he stated that, like Reverend Johnson, I too was like, I believe your eyes, right? I mean, we saw this man lay on this man's neck with his knee for 9 minutes and 29 seconds without any conscience, without any remorse, without any compassion. However, as I was looking at what the defense is trying to build up his case with, he's stating, he's making a case about volatile witnesses, an inappropriate environment, the fact that police officers are human beings and they have to make snap judgments. You have to assess whether you protect yourself from a hostile scene or provide care to a person that's in your custody. So he's building a case on the defense that Mr. Chauvin is not a robot, he's not inhuman, and he's not perfect in his judgment, as none of us are. So he's trying to state that with the laws that they have in place in terms of use of force, the neck restriction is not illegal. Yes, it was excessive, but if he felt, I mean, the defense is reaching and grasping for straws to build a defense. And if he can legally demonstrate that this officer acted in what he understood to be the policies and the process based upon his understanding of the training, he's putting the burden on the prosecution to really point out those areas such as the amount of time, the lack of regard, the lack of compassion, the fact that he didn't appear to check for life signs. But the other part of that was that all of the witnesses, very few of them, in fact, I think only one was aware of the two other officers in the back who may have been checking a pulse and that sort of thing. So it just depends to me on what the actual courtroom ethic is in terms of what and how the jury is instructed, and how effectively the defense attorney can demonstrate that Officer Chauvin, in a very hostile environment with people threatening him, and just the way that he felt he was trained and practices, he's trying to build a case on that. And I think that the prosecution is effectively pointing out that it was excessive. And that is what he has to continue to do, I think, to punch holes in the procedure and policies that are in place according to what Mr. Chauvin may have felt was in place.
One of the things that, as I've watched the trial, that I think the defense attorney his strategy is to get one juror. I think he's aiming at just one juror. He's playing to the mindset of one juror, and to what Ivette is saying, he's polling out the different elements, pointing out the different variables to try to get that one juror, because that's all you need. He doesn't have a defense. He knows that, the evidence shows that. But if you can get one of those jurors to even say, well, he might have made a bad human error, a bad judgment, or the drugs may have caused that. All you need is one juror to have a hung jury, and then with that hung jury, then you have, again, the climate kicking in. Because once you have a hung jury, then you're going to have the elements of individuals, a community that feels there's no justice. So you're going to have the reaction to the no justice. That means you're going to have protests, violence across the country. So your next trial is even going to be harder to prove, because you got to then get a jury that's there. But, because when you look at the evidence, even with Dr. Stoll, who testified yesterday, as he went down the list to show that he wasn't delirious, that he was conscious, he was in a conscious level, you have individuals on the jury that were looking for just that slight variable that they could to be able to hang up that jury.
I think that brings us to a really important question. What are each of you doing, and maybe Reverend Johnson, we'll start with you on this, to prepare the communities that you interact with, the folks that you interact with, for the possibility of various outcomes in this case, and you have all alluded to whether it's a hung jury, and obviously there's 3 charges that he's facing. We may not agree with the result. How do you prepare a community to deal with that?
So a couple things. One, you can't really prepare anybody for that, right? Everybody is going to have their own emotion no matter how this thing goes. There is just absolutely no way that one person can bear that cross or carry that burden, or one group of people for how this is going to go. What I can tell you is that what myself and others are doing along with State Rep Ko is trying to communicate effectively to our groups of people, trying to let everybody know, hey, look, however this goes, we're going to do this in a way where we can be heard and we can be effective. And the only ways that we can do that is by changing policy, changing laws, registering people to vote, and getting people to the polls to actually vote. If we want to start really changing things, we got to change our city council. We got to change our governor. We got to change those who are in the state house. And we have to start implementing policies and laws that will actually help when it comes to these things. This trial is being allowed to go down the way that it is because it was a policy that allowed it to happen. It was an excessive force policy that did not effectively define what he should or should not have done and why he's on trial now. And so what I'm doing and what we're doing on this call is trying to effectively communicate that if you're not registered to vote, if you're not showing up to the polls to vote, then whatever policy or whatever law is put into place, even right here in this state of Iowa, and there's been a few that has gone through the state house that State Rep Ko has tried to fight this entire session. There's been a few that have gone through that we're going to have to fight anyway. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate people to the point where they understand being civically engaged is a life or death situation at this moment. It's bigger than George Floyd. It's bigger than Breonna Taylor. It's bigger than Ahmaud Arbery. It's bigger than Tamir Rice. It's bigger than Trayvon Martin. Hell, it's bigger than Rev Johnsons, Yvette, and State Rep Ko. It's bigger than all of us. What this is this is a community of people who have been oppressed, dogged out, looked over, and completely ignored economically, socially, environmentally, and multiple other ways. We can't even start to talk about healthcare. We can't even start to talk about food deserts. We can't even start to talk about just even dealing with our own body, our physical health. When it comes to how we live, where we live, transportation, infrastructure, small businesses. There's so many things at stake here. I can't, and I'm smiling to keep from crying because because if I don't, I'm gonna cry tears just thinking about it as a 33-year-old Black man looking at my mentor who is twice my age, who's been doing this for a long time, continue to tell us that, hey, we got to stay on this battlefield. And I can't even imagine the things that this man has gone through and things that he's suffered through and things that he's had to fight through at the State House. And then for us to be here now in 2021 talking about justice when it was George Floyd, when back in the 1968, we should have been had this conversation. So, excuse me while I digress, but yes, I believe what we're trying to do is educate people so that they understand that this is a policy and a law thing. And if we don't put the right people in the right places, then we'll never be able to achieve what we need to achieve.
Yvette, what do you think? Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree with Rob. And also in terms of preparing the community, John, the majority of the individuals that come into Creative Visions or speak to this trial, the majority of them are already set for disappointment. After Larry Milton, Rodney King, I mean, to see back at that time before we had the era of cell phones, I mean, those guys beat that man until they were tired. And it was on video, and we didn't get a justified outcome from that. So because policies are in place and laws are in place that disproportionately impact communities of color, those policies were in place to protect other individuals. And sadly, those are laws, and those laws will be enforced. It makes me think that some of the policing bills that are being presented across the nation are being put in place to avoid, in the hopeful event that we get a justified outcome with the George Floyd case, there are policies that are being put in place across the state in terms of police brutality and what you can and can't do to police officers that I think will provide them blanket protections against potential lawsuits that may arise once the George Floyd, or if the George Floyd case gets a guilty verdict. And then, because you're going to find, and this can open the door to civil lawsuits and hopefully policing policy change. So in terms of preparing the people, I mean, we're all hopeful. You want to have hope. You don't want to be completely and totally discouraged. But an acquittal or a hung jury would not be a surprise to the community. And quite frankly, I think the result of that will be the numbness that we've experienced and felt for decades as we experience and go through this system.
You know, one of the ways that I think we're all also preparing the community is showing that we are not in this alone. You know, we don't have the luxury not now to come together. So that's why there's more than just Officer Chauvin on trial. The very fiber of communicating, organizing, and unifying is on trial. The very fiber of America is on trial, you know. And so just like we cannot separate what is going on now that is coming to light with the Asian community from what has been going on for decades with the African-American community. We cannot be separate now with the LGBTQ community, you know, what is separated that's going on with Native American. Persecution is taking place, you know, universally, you know, and here now we have to be able to come together and not struggle in silos. That means that when we at the State House are dealing with a bill, taking the cultural diversity training out of the schools, are preventing telling individuals they don't need a permit to carry a weapon, then all these communities need to be in the gallery.
Right.
All age groups need to be in the gallery. You know, we need to be. You can't look at me, you know, I can't look at Rob and Yvette and say, oh, you're young, you don't know. They can't look at me and say, well, you're old and old school. We now have to come together to look at each other's, you know, what we bring to the table. We have to, what we each bring to the table so that we complement and develop a comprehensive strategy for us to work together to beat this devil down. You know, that's what we have to be able to do. So, and when you air that part, let me do a disclaimer. I don't want somebody to say he's calling white people devils. So I don't want to, you know, so let's be clear with that. You know, I'm talking about mentality. You know, I'm talking about a conditioning that has kept us divided, and it keeps us divided on different levels, because if I can get you fighting me and me fighting Yvette and Yvette fighting Rob, then the conditions that have brought us to this point will continue to happen. But if we come together, we put a stop to it. We start dealing with systemic change instead of cosmetic change.
I want to thank the three of you for taking some time this morning to share your thoughts. Obviously, you've all had some very powerful things to say, you know, as a result of the powerful 2 weeks that we've seen in this trial. I look forward to reconvening with you guys next week and expanding on some of the things that we've talked about. So thank you.